Okie dokie. All right. Well, this morning I had a sermon prepared for talking more about heretical teachings and the things that basically that you need to have in order to understand the truth and not be dissuaded by false doctrine. But I wanted to stop a minute because of the tumultuous events of this week. And sometimes it's better, and I think I'm going to just sit down in the chair here in a minute and just talk to you about the things that are going on. Now, you see what's happening, and what's the biggest disruption that we have, and that is, you see, the United States has teamed up with Israel to destroy a nation. Okay? And many of you are looking in the Bible for answers to that and how that comes about. And there's a lot of improper teaching out there with regards to prophecy. Now, we had long ago figured out that what we believed, the war with the Medes and the Persians, that was the Iraq-Afghan war. Okay? And I have Iran there. That should be Iraq. Because the Persians are the Afghans and not the Iranians, and that was key to understanding that. So, where are we today? That's the real question. It's no surprise to me, and I think to many in this church, about the events that have happened. We knew they were coming. Okay. So what we saw was the war between the Medes and the Persians. We saw the rise of the four kingdoms, which is the BRICS, and that happened in May of 2024. And then we start to see the rise of a world leader. Okay? The next thing on the political agenda, or I should say on the prophetic agenda, would be this red heifer sacrifice, which is somewhere where we're at now. Okay? Between now and what I believe is Hanukkah. Now, I've talked to this in the past, but I'll talk to it once more. There's passages in Daniel that talk about, in Daniel 12, it says that the prophecies are sealed up until the time of the end. And of course, we recognize that the time of the end starts with that war of the Medes and the Persians. And that was in Daniel chapter 8:17. And we use the anchor for that as the law of first mention. And the time of the end is first mentioned in Daniel chapter 8, verse 17. So now we have to go through and we have to say, oh, okay, what about the rest of the dates and the times? And you've all heard that the typical Baptist belief system is a 7-year tribulation. Okay? And being dispensationalists, we know that God inserted 2,000 years from his crucifixion until the time of the end. But the problem becomes, if you're a strict dispensationalist, then you start adding up times and time, and you end up with a physical problem. One of the physical problems is you have 3.5 years excess. Okay, where does that go? And the other problem you have is Daniel 9:27, where it talks that the Messiah is cut down in the midst of the week. Okay, there's a fundamental problem there, right? How can Messiah be cut down in the midst of the week and yet the tribulation be 7 years long? So the understanding that we came to probably about 5-6 years ago was that the tribulation is actually split. And that split, the first 3.5 years of Christ's ministry, okay, were troublous times. And why we came to that understanding was because, the Jews had to be given the opportunity to accept Jesus Christ, which they didn't. And that led to the interjection of 2,000 years of what we call the age of grace, or the church age. Now we get into a period of time where it'll be 3.5 years of tribulation. But you go back to Daniel and there's something interesting. He talks about there's from the day of the sacrificing, there's 2,300 days until the cleansing of the temple. Okay? And so what happens is, it took me a long time to put these things together. I started taking 2,300 days from Passover, counting forward, 2,300 days from the Feast of Trumpets, 2,300 days from the Feast of Tabernacles, 2,300 days from the Day of Atonement, and nothing ever jumps out at you. But there is one thing that shows up year after year after year, and it's very interesting. And that is, if you take the 2,300 days and you start it on the first week of Hanukkah, and this year it's on December 4th, 2026, and you arbitrarily say, okay, 2,300 days starts the yearly sacrifice, or the daily sacrifice restarts on Hanukkah, and you count forward 2,300 days, you end up at March 22nd, 2033. Okay? All right. So there's a key. There's 3 other numbers that Daniel talks about. He talks about 1290, 1260, and 1335. So everybody goes from here and says, okay, and they count forward. 1335, 1290. Well, that's wrong. Okay? You do it the other way. You go from the end back to the beginning. Okay? So you get to the 2,300 days at the cleansing of the temple, and then you go back 1,335 days. And this is how I know, I'll say 99% sure that my interpretation of this is correct, right? And we have to be careful, right? Because what does the Bible say? The Bible said that, prophecy is of no private interpretation. So we have to read what it says, and we have to believe what it says. But just as Daniel was able to discern the times of the year and how years were equated to days and days and years, all right, this is how we understand it. So you go forward 2,300 days, and then you go back to 1,335 days. You go backwards from the cleansing of the temple. And when you get to that day, it turns out, if you're using this year's timeline, and remember I told you this repeats every year. This alignment happens, and it's always been there, just nobody realized it. That 1335 is the 15th of Av. Now, people out in the world will say, well, why does Av? Av sounds familiar. On the 9th day of Av, that was the year, that was the month that both temples were destroyed. Exactly on that day, the 9th of Av. Very interesting. Turns out that the 15th of Av is called Shemesh Ashar. It's a minor Jewish holiday, and it's about the marriage supper, and it's about a love feast. It's about love. So what we have learned and what we have come to believe based on this, and it's not just a singular event, it's based on all these alignments. And that specific alignment is the fact that you count back, and that falls on that very specific day. So we say that the most probable day of the rapture would be on that 1335th day, on that Jewish holy day, which is Shemesh Ashar in the 15th of Av. And that would happen if the daily sacrificing starts this year on the 2026, and it may very well, based on current events, right? You see that, then that July 26, 2029 would be the most likely date, okay? And you say, well, okay, well, maybe, sure, that's just your opinion. Well, all right. So go back here and count back 1,290 days. What does that fall on? That falls on the Feast of Trumpets. Okay? Now, what is the 1,290th day? In the book of Daniel, it says that's the day that the Antichrist stops the sacrificing. Okay? So, from the start of the sacrificing, whenever it may be, and again, we'll put it out as December 4th, to September 9th, 2029, is 1,010 days. Now, for those of you who know a little bit about gematria, and we don't use it a lot, but we just use it as an aside, we realize that the number 10, right, is the number of the Gentiles. And what does it say about Jerusalem? Jerusalem is trodden down by the Gentiles, right, for a time and half a time. Okay, 1,260 days. Oh, so 10-10, right? Just an oddity. That's kind of what gematria is a lot. Sometimes it's an oddity. It's a finger that points in a direction. So from that point now, if you go back to here and you go back to 12, you get to 1290. And then again, you go back to 1260, and that is reported to be when the Antichrist stands in the temple and declares himself God. It's at the same, coincidentally, the 144 are sealed, and the 2 witnesses show up at that very exact time. Okay? And then you have a times, a time, and a half a time. So that times a time and half a time is counted Feast of Tabernacles to, Feast of Trumpets to Feast of Trumpets to Feast of Trumpets to Feast of Trumpets. So you have 1 year, 1 year, 1 year, and then half a year. What's that half a year? Well, remember the prophecy said until the cleansing of the temple. March 22nd, 2033 is 7 days after Purim. And what was Purim? Purim is also part of the cleansing, but it's the salvation of the Jews, right, from all of their enemies back in the book of Esther. Okay? So there are a lot of coincidental things on this timeline. Okay? Is it fact? I don't know for sure, but I'll put this out. There's a lot of coincidences here, and I don't believe in coincidences, but there are, in addition to the coincidences, you're set up at a time in which things are confusing, right? I think as time will go by in the next couple of days, you're going to have to see a capitulation of the Iranian government. They're in a position where they will have to capitulate. And what that does in the big picture of things, this is a big lesson to the Islamic nations. Okay? So remember, Israel teamed up with America, and it's kind of a proof positive. It's a smack in the face to the Islamic rulers that Islam can be defeated. Okay? Now remember, many of the people in Islam were looking to Iran becoming a nuclear power and becoming stronger and being able to destroy the great Satan, which was America and Israel. But now the tables are turned. Okay? And if you've seen the Islamic people on the Temple Mount, they're talking about how they are scared about all of the Jews going up and praying prostrate on the Temple Mount, and it seems to be a little bit scary to them, and they're avoiding the Temple Mount. Okay? Now that is the power of God at work, because remember in the Old Testament it says, "I will put the fear of God into your enemies." Okay? So there's another little again, it's the coincidences that go along. Years ago, I did a sermon that was banned from YouTube, and that sermon had to do with the preponderance of the evidence versus when you have a criminal court, you have beyond a reasonable doubt. So what I'm presenting to you on this timeline, and I have for about 5 years now, is the preponderance of the evidence. Okay, we see through the glass dimly, right? We're not sure, it's kind of hard, but as you get closer, you start to figure these things out. Right? We know that the next thing on the timeline, according to the Jews themselves, they are going to sacrifice a red heifer, and then they are going to restart the daily sacrifices, and then they're going to rebuild the temple, which would be in this period of time, Why? What is it about that they have to do? Well, the very simple answer to that is because their standpoint of their religion is to believe that they have to restart the sacrifices in order to purify the nation and to bring about peace and to bring about the coming Messiah. That's what they believe. Now, the answer to that is yes, Messiah is going to come, but not necessarily because of their sacrificing, because of Jesus' sacrifice. And that's why we jump into this tribulation, where what happens is, notice very simply too, a lot of people don't get this point. There's two things in the Bible. It talks about Israel and it talks about Jacob. Okay? Jacob, when you look at it inspirationally, right, is the nation of Israel in its prior form, right? Jacob was the usurper. He was the guy that stole the birthright from his brother, and so he was a rebel, and he was a what's the word? Well, we'll just call him a criminal for lack of a better word. He wasn't really a criminal, but he was hard-hearted. He was, self-centered, right? God worked with him for years in Syria, all right? And he had 2 wives, and he had to work like a dog until finally he gets it. He realized what it's like to be taken advantage of, and then God changes his name to who? Israel, okay? So the tribulation, if you read the Bible, it says it's the time of Jacob's trouble. So this stiff-necked hard-heartedness that Jacob had back in the day is the same thing that the Jews have today, okay? They are going to have to be crushed a bit until they realize and they accept Jesus actually was the Messiah and was the Christ, okay? Now, that's all I'm going to say about this right now. I'm going to have my son stop the video here, and I'm going to post this as a separate video, and then I'll get into the sermon that I have prepared for today. So that's what I wanted to tell you about for today's prophecy update. So,